We will be talking now about the aftermath of the Great Jewish Rebellion. By now, several historians of different schools were recording events. Thus we are at liberty to assume that much of what we know is generally true. Meanwhile, in Rome, Vespasian dies, and his son Titus rules for 2 years. Titus too dies in 81 AD, possibly because of the guilt over the unfortunate business with the temple in Jerusalem. And perhaps the fumes from the 79 eruption of Vesuvius contributed as well. Titus and Vespasian were able to complete the colosseum, and many lives were lost while the inaugural games took place. And in Rome they rejoiced. Titus was succeeded by his brother, which lasted for about 15 years. Then came along a bloke called Nerve, and 3 years later the well-known Trajan, who will take us forward to the year 115. In Judea, things had settled down to some extent. The same rain that flooded Rome in the year 80 brought prosperity and tranquility to the Middle East. The Sadducees were reduced to less than a significant role. Jerusalem temple was not rebuilt. Jerusalem itself was a mishmash of Jews and non-Jews and Persians and Hellenized people, as well as the 10th Legion, who kept the peace. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish governing body, was still active in Yavne, and it was very busy dishing out new and exciting instructions on how to be a better practicing Jew. But Yavne was in the lowlands of Judea. That entire area was dominated by immigrants from Greek colonies, Roman veterans who had settled down for retirement, and of all things, Christians who were considered heretics by the Sanhedrin. Political changes in the Sanhedrin enabled the old house of Hillel to become president again and reassume the role of chief judge, so to speak. There was always a big controversy over the role of the new influence of the non-scholarly classes who was gaining ground. Many of the Jewish scholars that were established in the Galilee were scornful of the new class. It was thus that the Sanhedrin moved up north during the 80s. The Jewish religion has been changing as well. Once the temple was lost, Jews started praying more and sacrificing less. The rabbinical establishment was Pharisee. This meant that belief in the afterlife was strongly established. Also, the hope for the true Jewish Messiah had dominated thoughts and prayer. Little praying houses were built in Jewish towns. They were called synagogues. Meanwhile, in the lowlands of Judea, still under the rule of Trajan in Rome, a new school of thought was introduced by Rabbi Akiva. Akiva was of the people, that is to say, a lower social class. He was greatly scorned by the scholars of the Galilee, but his school gained a good reputation. He had so many students that they had become a small militia. Akiva was a philosopher as well as a scholar. He handled many controversial religious issues, such as the issue of personal choice over determinism, the issue of the essence of good, and matters not sufficiently handled by earlier scholars. The success of the Jewish rabbinical schools became a threat to Roman governors of Judea and the Galilee. Each student was considered a future soldier and a potential rebel, and they probably were. Rome had a good memory of Jewish revolts. Back in the 1st century AD, during the time of Emperor Caligula, a massive uprising of the Jews of Alexandria resulted in the loss of 50,000 lives, a bloodbath. The memory of the Great Revolt in Judea in the year 66 to 70 had not faded yet. No one forgot. And yet in 115 AD, just as Emperor Trajan was busy fighting in Parthia, a second revolt took place in Alexandria, in Cyrene, in Antioch. Those revolts seemed to be headed by messianic thoughts, by the diaspora Jewish population, and by the resentment of the large non-Jewish populations in the larger cities. One could see that all of this made religious Jews a bit of a problematic lot, and everyone was religious then. New orders were given through the rule of Trajan. There should be no Torah study and no rabbinical ordination. This order caught the Judea establishment off guard. The whole social order and religious practice was based on rabbinical leadership and Torah study. Jews were infuriated by this order. They started studying secretly in caves and formed the religious underground group. Later this group would start the Bar Kokhba revolt. In Rome, Emperor Hadrian inherited the precious title. Hadrian was an incredible ruler. He is famous for many things, including the Hadrian born in England. Less popular, though, in Judea he was. What about China? Is it too far to have an influence in the Middle East? Apparently for now. The historical relevance of China is limited, for now. But China is there all the time, and during this period a great empire was formed, the Han Dynasty. It united a vast territory with organization skills unprecedented. Wisdom beyond anything seen in the West. We will hear more about the East. Oh, yes, we will. Hadrian expanded the borders of the Roman Empire far eastwards. On the return from his campaign against Parthia in the east, his army brought home a gift. A small and cunning problem crawled up the leg of the Roman Empire. A virus. Later, it was known as the Antonine Plague. It reduced the Roman population by 10%. Today, we think of it as an outbreak of smallpox. The Bar Kokhba revolt took place during those years, 133 and 135. It was during the reign of Hadrian. Rome was at its largest and at its best. The revolt was officially started as a result of Roman intention to banish Jews out of Jerusalem and rebuild it as a Roman town. This indeed took place, and Jerusalem was occupied by Romans and Christians and Persians. It was the final straw for many of the Judean Jews. In reality, the time was obviously ripe for another bloodbath. Today, in Israel, the Bar Kokhba revolt, as well as the entire period, is marked by Lag BaOmer, a festival, the bonfire night. As a teenager and a child, this was by far the best part of the year. Rabbi Akiva kept on teaching Torah, even though it was forbidden. Eventually he was arrested as a result of his civil disobedience. He was executed in 135 AD during the Bar Kokhba revolt. Many of his followers died of the plague, and in the revolt as well. His opponents within the scholars of the Galilee blamed him for supporting the revolt, which ended catastrophically. Historians are less inclined to agree with that. Today, Rabbi Akiva is considered a sage and a martyr. The Galilee Jews and scholars were generally quite a sensible group of people. They were less involved in the Bar Kokhba revolt and managed to stay safe. Stay safe, study the Torah. The southern part of Judea, less so. Bar Kokhba and his rebels were brutally subdued. Jerusalem was rebuilt as a Roman town, and many of the Judean rebels were either killed or sold as slaves. Some were able to immigrate out to the main cities of the Roman Empire. Thus, the Jewish diaspora outside of Judea had grown and prospered, and the Jews of the Galilee prevailed. Rome was generally busy with other problems, such as the Germanic tribes, to bother with them. The Sanhedrin was then in the Galilee, and the scholars got busy producing the first Jewish law compilation, which was called the Mishnah. The Mishnah summarized all of Jewish oral traditions and became the main encyclopedia of Judaic thought at the time. We are about to complete this chapter. We are at the year 235 AD. Things were quiet for a while in Rome. Christianity was on the rise. The 3rd century crisis was yet to come. Stay with us, for the next 2 centuries will be very interesting.